Good afternoon. So I welcome you, all of you, to this session on high-tech agriculture. We have a very interesting panel out here. We have Jinesh, who's a seasoned investor in AgTech, and we have three smart AgTech entrepreneurs, Krishna, Amar, and Ranjit, who are not just the pioneers in this sector, but also demonstrated that technology can be integrated in the agricultural supply chain, not only in India, but across the world. So just before I hand over mic to my fellow panelists, let me just make a few opening remarks to set the context. When we talk about technology in agriculture, be it sensors, drones, IoTs, lidars, etc., what does it mean, and what it is trying to solve? So, to my understanding, I think ultimately what it is trying to solve is the biggest problems that I see in agricultural supply chain world over, and more so in India. That's information and data. Or let me put it like timely information and accurate data. I think that is one of the biggest missing link, which causes a lot of inefficiencies, lack of transparency, and farmer gets less income and leads to a lot of food loss in the supply chain, all those issues. And once you have data, of course, the efficiency starts seeping into the system. For example, if you have, let's say, real-time data on soil moisture, soil NPK profile, you know how much to irrigate, where exactly to irrigate, what kind of fertilizer to be provided, how much have to be provided. So you can be very precise. Also, the technology makes farm management solutions, supply chain management solutions available to farmers and various stakeholders in the supply chain. You can also do monitoring of post-harvest farm produce during the storage, during the distribution, etc. So, all in all, it brings in more efficiency, more transparency, and brings more income in the hands of farmer. And it's not just the farmer who benefit. If you look at the entire supply chain, the input companies are selling to farmers, the output companies are buying from farmers, the banks were lending to farmers. They are able to do much better KYC, they can assess the credit worthiness. And last but not the least, the crop insurance companies, which has been a very sort of challenging issue for India in general. Technology can play a big role in assessment of the risk, in online monitoring of crop cutting experiments, which is an integral part of crop insurance, and also in settlement of a lot of insurance claims. So clearly, there's a huge role which technology can play in agriculture, and that's why we are seeing a significant surge in adoption of technology. By some estimate, it's said that about 40 million IoT devices as of now in agriculture installed somewhere in the world, and that number probably can touch 80 million IoT devices by 2020. And each IoT device has the capability to transmit millions of data points, and I will let the entrepreneur talk about that. As far as investor interest is concerned, this has been a remarkable year globally. For the first time, we have seen a $200 million VC deal in AgTech when SoftBank led investment into Plenty. I'm sure many of you will be aware, Plenty is a vertical farming farm which use a lot of internet-connected devices to improve the productivity. And they're claiming that productivity can go as much as 350 times using 1% of the water which is required in the conventional agriculture. So that is some claim. If I talk about a couple of other deals, John Deere invested in Blue River technology, and what Blue River does, they basically use robotics, computer vision, and some bit of AI ML algorithm to detect, monitor each and every plant in the farm. So which is the where are the weeds, and you can be very specific in applying herbicides. And John Deere paid almost $300 million for this acquisition. Likewise, DuPont acquired Granular, which is a farm analytics platform. So we've seen phenomenal amount of investor interest, and we know that a lot of investors are looking at India now from an AgTech perspective. So probably I'll pause here and get Ranjit into the discussion. Ranjit, you've been working on IoT devices, cloud computing, etc. for the dairy industry, and dairy is one of the most important sector for Indian food processing industry. Almost $50 billion, 150 million ton of production, and about 7 crore farmers involved in it. So just talk about a little bit about why have you chosen this sector? What kind of opportunities do you see? And what kind of challenges you face when you started selling the solutions to some of the large dairy companies whom we are working with?
Yeah, thank you, Hemendra, for that. Good afternoon, everyone. So as Hemendra said, Agri is too vast. So when we looked at Agri across the gamut of things, we realized that unless to take a solution into the market, we have to get focused and solve specific business problems. So what we did was, instead of taking a wide sweep at Agri, we looked at various crops and then picked milk as the first crop to go after. We want to pick a scalable crop, right? So you could actually view, if you view milk as a crop, 1/3 of Indian Agri is milk. Roughly 7.5% of India's GDP is milk. If you just take the milk value and the animal value, it comes to 4 plus 3.5, 7.5%. So we thought, let's go a little more deeper, keep all the other crops aside, look at milk as a specific crop, and see what problems we can solve. So in that context, what we did was, we are an IoT company, so we started building out an IoT platform where you can do two things. One, the ability to plug in sensors very easily on the southbound interface. Because any problem that you pick, there are a bunch of sensors you would need to integrate with. Right? So you need a platform agile platform where you can actually plug in sensors very quickly. Number two, the ability to develop applications very quickly on the northbound platform. Because every business problem needs some application to solve the problem. So we want to evolve towards some sort of an IoT app store type of a scenario, where it's very easy to develop applications on the northbound interface. So this entire stack, including the sensors, the hardware that controls the sensors, the cloud platform, and the applications, is our core product. We call it a full stack IoT solution. And this stack, we apply it to the dairy supply chain. What do I mean by dairy supply chain? You have the farm, where you have small farmers producing milk. From the farm, the milk comes to a milk aggregation point, milk collection centers. From there, milk goes to a milk chilling center. From the milk chilling center, it goes into the processing plant. And our focus was to have sensors across the supply chain. For example, on the farm side, we have animal wearables. It's like a Fitbits for cows that can detect a lot of animal data and send it to the cloud. And then on the milk aggregation side, we integrate with milk analyzers that can detect how much is the added water, what's the adulteration and composition, and all of that. And on the chilling side, how do I ensure that the milk is perhaps the most perishable crop, vis-a-vis all the crops that you see there. And it's not just a plain vanilla temperature monitoring. You also need to do very domain-intense monitoring. Are they actually cleaning that equipment where the milk is stored so that the bacterial load doesn't go up? Is there a somatic cell count, profile change as the milk is getting chilled? And the idea is the data gathered at one end should be correlatable with the data gathered at the next stage, so that you don't look at each of these nodes in the supply chain in isolation. You look at it as a whole and start making sense out of this data. And then disseminate this information to all the stakeholders, dairy companies, the veterinary doctors, the paravets, the farmers, and all of them, with 4 objectives. 1, improving yield. 2, reducing cost. Build in traceability. And 4, enable more data-driven decision making. And today, as we speak, we have about a couple of billion liters of milk flowing to the cloud. About 1 million farmers registered on the platform. So that's essentially what we do.
Just one question. When you started selling this product to the dairy companies, which are not used to such kind of technologies, what were the typical challenges you faced, and how did you overcome that in terms of adoption by the dairy companies that are there in India?
Yeah. And our problem was further amplified by the fact that just about less than half of the dairy is regulated. So you have the government dairies, you have the Amuls, the KMFs, and all that. About 45% is them, and then 55% is private. So obviously the government dairies go with the tender process and all of that. So that makes things even more complex because you're trying to do a tender for a technology that doesn't exist, right? So let's talk about the easier problem, the private. So in the private side, they're so focused on acquiring, collecting the good old dirty milk and taking it to the market, because that itself is a huge market. As someone at the panelist in the morning mentioned, there is still high-quality milk or organic milk, and all of them is still not into the mix yet. And people are used to working on low margins. So what we did was we had to show them per liter efficiencies improving. So we went through a long trial period. So it's not a very when we started, it was not a very investor-friendly approach, because you have to prove things. So it doesn't grow month on grow at 20-30%. You need to put the solution, show that it grows, show that it works, and talk to the CXO and the board. The larger tier 1 dairy, so what we did was two things. One, we picked the most progressive dairy because we wanted good case studies. And we started approaching them at the board level, saying that, look, your balance sheet looks like this. I can have a solution with which your balance sheet can look different. And here is the proof of the pudding. But if I talk to your head of procurement, he is just happy doing one-on-one. He's focused on procuring milk, not breaking operations. So do you want to roll it out? And if it doesn't work, I'll take back the entire solution. Don't have to make a penny. So we were lucky to hit into a couple of progressive dairies who said, yes, I want my balance sheet to look better. Show me this work for 500 units, which is like 1% of the collection, and show me this works. We showed it works, and then they gave us the contract for the entire procurement. So a little bit of consultative selling to begin with, and looking at the first progressive guy was what it took. Then eventually, we will tell, look, that guy did this, do you want it? Kind of stuff. That's a little easier, but still we are trying to struggle.
That's great. Good to hear. Krishna, let me come to you. You're the early starters in Indian AgTech space. You started in 2010. I know the struggle that you've gone through initially, but now you work across continents, work across states, reaching 500,000 farmers, which is commendable. Just tell us about your experiences, and if you can be specific in terms of talking about how, let's say, Indian agri ecosystem is different from rest of the world in terms of adoption of technology, and also what kind of value proposition do these technologies have for smallholder farmer? 80% of farmers are still less than 2 hectares. And farmer can't pay for most of this technology. So I think good to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah. So let me start with a brief introduction of what Cropin does. So Cropin is a B2B SaaS-based platform, and we help agribusinesses to adopt a digital strategy into their businesses. The focus is to bring sustainability, scalability, and efficiency in the whole ecosystem. The focus is to increase per acre value. When we say per acre value, it just doesn't mean that just increase the productivity. But can you bring a farm-in-the-box solution for a farmer who is dealing with climate shift, who is dealing with almost no finance? Nobody wants to give a loan, whether it's a government or it's a private sector bank. Or when he needs a right advisory on his crop, he should have a right kind of advisory at his doorstep. And still, he's not going to pay for it, so somebody need to pay for it, and that's where the B2B evolution happened. And so there's already a stake of B2B to work with this farmers. So if you look at our customers are across the segment, so anybody who's trying to whose ecosystem has a farmer is our potential customer, right from government NGOs, farming companies like Philip Morris, McCain, ITC, Mahindra's, Mars. You eat chocolates. And then chocolate has a groundnut, so groundnut need to be monitored and grown in right conditions. A NBFC or bank who is lending to the farmer, can he have a backup with the data and intelligence which help him to minimize his risk as well as go forward and give that loan and financing to the farmer? Or an insurance company, can he build a new product for that particular crop in that particular region, because every region, every crop has a different risk. And probably that crop in that particular plot has a different risk than his fellow farmer. So can we build a high volume, low cost product? In early days we had the 10 rupees recharge, right? And still telecom made a lot of money. So can we have a 15,000 rupees loan? It still can be serviced, and bank will be profitable, and that kind of a model can tech be so disruptive. We work with commodity traders who's trying to take a position. And let's say we recently did a work in Australia, Queensland. Sitting here, we told them that which are the plots which are chickpea and what is the yield going to be at the time of harvest, so that they can take that position right on. We not only stopped there, we told them which plot is high growth, low growth, medium growth, and what will be total output, what will be plot output. So we got that precise, and I think we are the first company to deliver this kind of result. And that was told by the client that most of the people stop at the vegetation or the quality of vegetation or the health of vegetation, but we have ability to do it even at 10 by 10 meter of a plot. And that, why that happened, because cropping has a very unique positioning today. We have got 4.2 million as we speak on a platform with 256 different crops we are supporting, 3,500 different varieties are on the platform. That gives us a unique positioning to learn from that data and apply and build algorithms which will detect and predict the future, right? What we also saw, satellite images has been there for 1975, right? The frequency was different. The frequency of those images were like 3 months or 30 days or 15 days. Resolutions were like from 1 kilometer resolution of one patch came down to 30. Now it came down to 10. Now Planet Lab gives you like 3, and they're talking about 1 and imaging the whole world every day. I think twice. Amardeep? Yeah. Yeah. So I think technology is changing. Computing power is becoming much more cheaper. And that's where we see the data platform and people are going to be the next driver in the agriculture. And one of the questions I was listening, which you asked him, that what was the challenge when you started, and how do you see this whole agri ecosystem got evolved over a period of time? I'll tell you one thing for sure: digitization is real in agriculture. So it's now getting implemented on the ground. People are started using it and taking advantage of data. When I used to sell it in 2011, the biggest challenge was that the company has to invest into asset. So they have to first they have to buy a smartphone, then they have to buy a 2G network for their guys, then load the application, and then they were working in the fields, right? So I remember doing work with the PepsiCo. So they asked their taxi aggregator to become a vendor to buy a phone and the 2G data and deliver it to the Pepsi at the higher rate, because they cannot create an asset within the organization. It takes even a small amount of investment in creating an asset requires a lot of approval. So we were dealing with that kind of a scenario. But today, if you go, every field officer has a smartphone. Even the penetration has gone into every villages. 4G is now accessible thanks to Reliance. And by default, data has to be there on the phone because there is no cost to a call now, right? So you can make a call through data, like on the Reliance. So I think in the environment is very right today, and we don't see those kind of issues. One of the other challenges, they used to say, will my people be able to adopt this kind of technology in a kind of space they work? They have never gone beyond Excel sheet. I remember one of the discussion in a boardroom where he asked his general manager that, aap kar loge? And that was surprising because, 3 years back, if somebody is asking in the boardroom that, can you use this kind of technology? I was like shocked. If the general manager cannot do it, how the field people are going to adopt this kind of technology? But to my surprise, I think we have given these apps to people who has not even, 45 to 80-year-old, a progressive farmer who was not even educated, speaks only local language, and he used to recognize the apps with the icons, and he used to do the perfect work, right? So one of the guy told me that it's a sense of pride that what people sit in the Microsoft office or any large organization office and runs SAP and all those kind of ERP system for the organization to win, we are doing it standing at the farm without even having any training engineering background. But we are able to give you that kind of a data or that kind of a workflow we are able to manage through the system, right? So I see a lot of change. Also, I got to know that one of the guy got hired in another organization because they used Cropin, and he became a lead there because they wanted to implement that Cropin in their organization. So I think it has an impact on across the supply chain, right from the organization getting a value. Field officer getting upgraded, coming out of the farmer diary and using technology to assist himself. So when he goes to the plot, he sees the satellite images and he sees that which part of the farm is not doing well. So instead of scouting the whole farm, probably he can reduce his time and go to that particular specific area and raise the issue. And then the phone tells him that what should be the solution. So he doesn't have to wait for solution, even he's a newcomer in that particular field. farmer gets the right advice that, tomorrow morning there is a frost attack going to happen on the potato, so spray the water on the field. So, the stress on the sudden drop in temperature will not impact your farm. And that is already monitored, and, all conditions are monitored, and as and when it is happening real time, people are getting benefit out of this. Organization is getting a right forecast right before the harvest every 10 days that, how the commodity is moving and whether he will be able to procure the quality and the right output for the organization. So I think digitization has is going to change the game in agriculture, not only from the perspective for the businesses who are adopting it, but it's going to bring it down to even the smallest farmer. As one of the questions, how smallholder farmer is going to benefit it, because it's an interest of the whole ecosystem. What we believe, our ecosystem is going to be healthy if every participant in that ecosystem is healthy. If one goes down, the whole ecosystem goes down. So if the farmer goes down, whom we are going to do a business, or Syngenta will be no more Syngenta, or Monsanto will be no more Monsanto. So in their interest to take this kind of technology and reach out to all these guys and invest in the right direction. If I have to compare this with the issues in the other countries, so I've traveled extensively across the globe, right from Mexico to UK to Africa to US, and seen farmings across this region. I'll say problems are not very different than what my farmers are facing in India, whether it's a 1 acre or 1,000 or 10,000 hectare. I went to a farm in Mexico, down the hills. The guy lives 100 kilometer north. He was doing potato farming for PepsiCo. He was very scared. He said, we are very scared with the disease. If that happens, it wipes out my whole crop. And there was no data. I'll surely say that there is a mechanization, heavy mechanization, because that kind of a farm structure can support that. But data, there was no data. That's why the farm logs and the farm business network or granular came into picture in 2012 and 2013. So even they were missing the data point, right? Go to the largest organization in agriculture, they don't have a data. They are talking now about going back and digitizing their value chain, downside with the farmer. So the farmer, farmer is dealing with that, same kind of climate shift, uncertainties in other countries also. One of the guys told me that, India has a very unique proposition having a small farm. So we say that, the farms are very small, staggered, and that's a risk for it. I mean, who wants to do business with those farmers? But, somebody told me that, look at it from a different perspective. If a 1,000 hectare farm on potato or corn got an issue, it can be wiped out, one go. But if you look at India, one guy has done 1 acre of potato, other guy has done some other crop. So risks get, diversified. I think Raman Ahuja may be in this room, and he gave me this perspective that, look at from a different angle, why we are blessed, because of this kind of a diverse scenario. So, yeah. So
great, Krishna. Very useful insights, and I totally agree. The ag ecosystem has totally gone a sea change in last 7 odd years. I still remember 2010-11, probably 10 or 15 ag-tech entrepreneurs which we could count. Today I know at least 250 who are there. I'm sure the actual number will be probably higher. So great. Over to you, Amar. You, of course, Krishna touched upon satellite imagery and stuff like that. You specialize in geospatial data.
Sure. So
it will be good to hear your thoughts on that. And I think you're also working very closely with the Andhra government. If you can talk a little bit how government partnership can help scale these innovations, it will be good.
Thanks. So what we do and how we approach this problem is we realize that in agriculture, or there are lots of problems which are across a large area. So we say we are in the business of large area analytics, where we use satellites. We are leveraging 2 or 3 parameters of these. One, satellites can see a massive area. So for an example, a single image is 250 by 250 kilometers. If I have to get the data for a state, I can get it in under 2 days. And I can repeat that daily. I can repeat that in certain scenarios even hourly. What is going to happen, there was a new constellation when India launched that century of satellites. So there was a constellation of satellites, which was 80 of them, they were from the same constellation. They will start imaging every image, every square meter of the earth every hour or under an hour. And those are going to come online in another few months. So what we saw was this opportunity that the frequency of data that is becoming very, very frequent, the cost is reducing. When I say cost, you can actually now get data for a square kilometer at under $1, 50 or 60 rupees. And you can repeat that very, very frequently. Okay. The second advancement that we started leveraging was the advance in big data, where we are able to slice and dice this data and actually process it in almost real time. So why is this important? This is important because this is starting to bring visibility into issues across the value chain, like what we were talking about, right? From our business model, we are essentially focusing as a B2B play, and it's got nothing to do with it's got more to do with customer acquisition than with anything else. To be a successful enterprise, that is our business strategy. But the companies that we work with are very similar to what Krishna was saying: banks, insurance companies, reinsurance companies. And the problem that we are solving is essentially the thing around agriculture risk. Okay, what we are seeing is lots of the banks and lots of they are trying to figure out the business model around operating in this area. Okay, if I take agriculture insurance in India, it is a $3 billion market today. Okay, only serving 25% of the customers, farmers, but it's still not solving the actual problem for the farmer. It only solves the problem of input. What the farmer actually requires is some assurance on income not happening. Why is that not happening? Because the insurance companies can't figure out how much risk is evolving across the crop. Okay? When I talk to banks, they are trying to figure out what is the, which is a good farm, which is a bad farm. Reality, what happens when they go and figure out, to do risk assessment on the loan, the farmer will show a piece of land saying there's crop. May or may not actually be his farm. So these kind of questions are coming up repeatedly. Okay? And what does that imply? That the trust in the data is not there for decision making, either up the chain or down the chain. So there's a huge opportunity as we see. We built a platform which allows us to layer multiple data sets, whether it's satellite data, whether it's weather data, economic data, and start processing and generating these signals for a huge amount of large area. And how we actually visualize this data is not from just the problems that we've seen. We think this kind of thing will allow us to actually change the entire business model around farms. Okay, some things that Krishna was alluding to, where today a lot of decisions and a lot of solutions are very point solutions. They are not integrated. Okay, so you cannot actually benefit from economies of scale. But with this kind of data coming in and getting integrated, we think that ultimately, from a big data point of view or from a business model point of view, integrated solutions are likely to appear, which will enable different funding strategies to come into play, both at the farm level as well as people like us who are actually providing solutions. And that is where we think true innovation is likely to appear. I'll stop over there for now because we would like to let people take questions.
So over to Dinesh. I think from an investor perspective, tell us, what do you look at when you look at AGRI-TECH innovations? What kind of scale do you see? What kind of readiness do you see in Indian context of adoption of this technology? And, there's a lot of debate around hardware versus software. Do you see it differently, or, what is your view on this particular aspect?
Thanks, Heminder. Good afternoon, everyone. Just a context. I work with Omnio Partners, which is an AgTech focused fund, investing in young startups at seed stage, Series A kind of stage where we come in. So basically, going back to your question, what we look in AgTech, I think when we started the journey in 2011-12, I think AgTech was something which was undefined. I think to make the first investment and go to LPs to see what is AgTech was a big challenge. But hopefully now things have become much more evolved. And in today's context, it's all about how I can get the data from the agriculture field and adopt what we call the variable rate of farming, which is trying to figure out which part of the crop or which part of the land you should grow what crop, and what I need to do to ensure that I get the most optimal yield, which will help farmers to make more income and which will help the businesses create a more value chain approach on that. So that is what a broad thing, things like IoT, things like geospatial, these are means to achieve what the goal is, to see how farmers' income can increase. That's what we look around it. In terms of what we look in AgTech is like, we look in AgTech saying that can this technology or the entrepreneur create a solution which is probably focused on the smallholder farmers, because smallholder farmers represent a very large set of population, represented in countries like India, Southeast Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa. The rationale is very, very economical, right? Saying if we can solve the problems of smallholder farmers, at some point I can go back and leverage this solution to a largeholder farmer and probably go back to the Western world and figure out saying that, guys, we have a solution which is probably at 1/10 the price point and probably is similar accurate. That's what we think, how we look at AgTech, where can we reach to that scale? That's what the investor will look in. In terms of quality of entrepreneurs, we look about how, can this guy do it, right? Because agriculture is not a glamorous sector. It's a very painful sector from a VC perspective and from an entrepreneurship perspective. So we want to see whether the guys have spent few years doing this. Can they go across the countries? All three of them on the panel are representing a set of entrepreneurs we would want to invest. About the question, Hemendra, whether we look at hardware, software, I think I say it's just a means, right? IoT is a buzzword right now where you use a combination of hardware, software. But in a country like India, hardware is very critical because Indians don't pay for software, right? So unless you show that there is some hardware and you're putting something which you can control the hardware, people will not pay for it. So we would want to invest in companies where hardware is an integral part of the strategy, but it is not the only part because at some point it becomes a constraint for growth. That's how we look around it.
Cool. Thanks. Amar, you want to make a point?
Yeah. Sorry, you had asked a specific question around Andhra Pradesh, so I missed that. So the Andhra Pradesh government has been very supportive in trying to figure out innovative solutions on scale. The story I'll give is we had done calculations for yield across the state. We went and talked to the state. The government said, okay, there's a variation in data. Your data does not match our data. But then they were not defensive. They said, okay, let's see. Okay, so we are going to do some controlled experiments. They were doing some controlled experiments in figuring out yield where they gave us locations and said, tell us according to your calculations, what's the yield? It came out to be in the close to 90% accuracy for us across those locations. How we achieved that was across those locations where there was variation in cropping patterns and variation in irrigation, variation in a lot of inputs. We had actually innovated around figuring out something called water stress in crops. So from there, we were able to actually say what the yield is going to be. Then they said, okay, that's good. let's reverse the problem. Can you tell us the locations, we'll go and validate. Okay, so initially those are controlled locations where they were doing, then reverse, again we met that. Then they supported us further. There was a lot of IoT data that they were collecting. We were given access to that data. That enabled us to improve our yield calculations even additional 3 to 4%. Okay, now that same experiment is now getting extended across a wider area, across multiple crops, multiple seasons, and also we are starting to innovate even around ground truth collection, which is the most effective way to actually correct the ground truth, the way it is getting collected, where there's fudging and a lot of inaccuracies coming in. How can we actually answer those questions and again start providing answers to the government, and the government can use it not only from insurance but also in minimum support pricing, as well as in looking at in very backward areas how to provide loans. Because what's normally happening, the private bankers are only going after areas where the cost of the land is high. So for the government, the exposure to those areas where they actually need funding is not going in. So again, this entire journey with Andhra Pradesh has been very fruitful for us.
Great, good to hear. I think one aspect that we didn't touch is this, the whole opportunity around AI ML. Most of the pitch document that I received nowadays, this is like an integral part. So I don't understand, because this industry is nascent in India, and I believe if you have to do AI ML, there has to be sufficient data points or history. So are we at a stage where we can make accurate predictions with AI ML, or we have there's a need for a digital library to be created first before we really scale these innovations?
So
one of you can take it.
Okay, I'll go ahead. Right. So I think currently a lot of AI ML is being put in for point solutions. Right. I'll take Ranjit's case. I'm pretty sure they are using that. All right. But those are where we see AI ML to come in across the entire plant is around I'll give you an example how we see this problem. We are monitoring a particular area in another geography, which is like 4,500 contiguous acres for rice. We are getting data almost every week or so for every 10 meters of that. We have turned the problem around and said, I have people in my team who are astrophysicists who were looking at the radio telescope data. Okay, radio telescope data is very similar to this when you're from a electromagnetic waves point of view. What they do in that case is, you are getting data for stars, and you want to figure out how many planets are in front of the stars. So they do deep learning and identify the tracks of the planets and count that. We turned that around and we said, can we take the same methodology across this huge data set that we've got and figure out the variation in various crops, various simple plots, and identify where the variation is starting to appear. Okay, now what is important is, okay, once you got yield, the game is over. Can we actually figure out that point in time where using this massive, when I say massive data set, now in this case it's 150,000 points, okay, and now it's 150,000 time series that are parallel. And those kind of methodologies you can't do it without AI ML or without deep learning in that case.
I think to answer your question, you need data.
Yeah.
And we waited for 4 years to have that data generated on the platform for various crops when we thought this is a game changer. And that too, live data, right from which plot, which variety, what is the geotag, what input went into, what was the output. Then you combine that data with this, satellite imagery every 10 days. Then you combine with the weather analytics. And then you develop an ability to look back 4 years back on the same plot and predict whether he did the same crop last season on the same, right? So you created a stack of data. From the same plot, even that plot came today. So one is that you have to have data because that's self-data science is about data, historical data to work with. I'll say, everybody's talking about data science and machine learning, and I think that's the key to find the patterns. If you have seen that movie on the Indian mathematician who went to UK, he takes the sand and he just throws it and he says, I want to find the pattern in this also. I want to find the pattern why sky is blue, red, and other stuff, right? And that's what the data scientist does. They are sector agnostic, right? They just look at data and say, I think this is a pattern it's telling, right? And why? Because they are not looking from the ag perspective. They are looking for the anomaly perspective. So if there is to give you a very relevant example, if there is so we are now working on a fertility map. If I can look at the plot for last 3 years, and if I know when he is doing the sowing and when he is doing the harvesting with the data science and detection capability, and then I find every time this patch of the farm is showing a low growth, and then I see the next season if the same pattern is happening, then I detect the anomaly saying that there's a problem with the soil. It's not with the seed, it's not with the crop, it's not with the disease, it's a problem with the soil. And how do you find those patterns? So more the data, more it is. Now I'll give you another example. So once you reach a stage where you have built those...
I think we have 3 minutes, so probably can... Sure. So maybe some final word from
you. Just a quick take on machine learning. So for us, it's an integral part of what we do. We implement things like Kalman filter on the animal side. For example, when exactly should you inseminate the animal so that it gets pregnant at the right time, and you can sort of reduce the dry period. If you're collecting milk, how do you know which milk is good for cheese, which milk is good for paneer, even before the milk arrives in the processing plant? So on the processing side, you're ready to take certain routes milk in a certain way. So I think it's integral, but as Amardeep said, it's very point applications, Kalman filter here. But to make it more wide-based, you need much more longer time series data so that you can apply much more stronger algorithms.
Thanks very much. I think we are out of time, so we can take any more questions offline. I thank all the panelists for wonderful insights, and I hope this conversation to be ongoing. Thanks very much. Thank you.
Thank you.